Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the shadowed world of ancient Greece, where gods walk among mortals and legends are born from blood and courage. Forget the polished tales of heroes you've heard before. This is the raw, dangerous truth behind the myths. The kind where one wrong move could mean turning to stone, or worse. You might think you're ready for the trials of the gods, but trust me, there's a reason these stories have endured for centuries. If you're enjoying these journeys into the past, a quick like or subscribe means the world. I love hearing where you're listening from, so drop a comment with your location and the time there. Let's see how far our little community stretches. Now make yourself comfortable, lying down or sitting. Close your eyes and simply enjoy. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. In a time when gods walked among mortals and the boundaries between earth and sky were thinner than morning mist, there lived a young man named Perseus, whose story begins not with glory, but with love. The fierce protective love of a son for his mother. Perseus and his mother Danae had known hardship since his earliest memories. They had been cast adrift upon the sea when he was but an infant, sealed within a wooden chest by Danae's own father, King Acrisius of Argos, who feared an oracle's prophecy. The waves had been their cradle, and fortune their only companion, until a kind fisherman named Dictys found them washed upon the shores of the island of Seriphos. There, in that small fishing village where the sea met the land in gentle conversation, they had built a modest but loving home. The years passed like soft tides, and Perseus grew strong and capable under his mother's tender care and the honest teachings of Dictys. Danae worked with quiet dignity, her hands skilled at the loom, her heart full of gratitude for their simple life. She taught Perseus not only to be brave, but to be kind, not only to be strong, but to be wise. In the evenings, as the sun painted the horizon in shades of amber and rose, she would tell him stories of heroes and gods, of courage that came not from the absence of fear, but from facing it with a steady heart. But peace, like all precious things, can be fragile. The island of Seriphos was ruled by King Polydectes, brother to the kind fisherman Dictys, though the two men could not have been more different in spirit. Where Dictys was humble and generous, Polydectes was proud and grasping. He held power over the island and its people, and he was accustomed to having whatever his desires settled upon. Over time, his gaze had fallen upon Danae, her grace, her quiet strength, the dignity with which she carried herself despite her past sorrows. At first, his attentions were subtle, gifts left at her door, invitations to the palace that she politely declined. But Polydectes was not a man who accepted refusal with grace. His interest grew into obsession, his courtesies into demands. He wished to make Danae his queen, not for love, but for possession, to claim her beauty and noble bearing as one might claim a treasure. Danae refused him again and again with a firmness that never wavered. She knew that accepting such a marriage would be a betrayal of herself, a surrender of the freedom and dignity she had fought so hard to preserve. But Polydectes was powerful, and she was only a woman without family or fortune in his kingdom. The weight of his position pressed upon her like gathering storm clouds. Perseus, now grown to young manhood, saw his mother's distress and felt his heart fill with protective fury. He was all she had in the world, and she was all he had. Their bond was woven with threads stronger than any the fates themselves might spin. He stood between his mother and the king's unwanted advances, his presence a shield, his determination a quiet flame that would not be extinguished. This defiance infuriated Polydectes. The king was not accustomed to being thwarted, especially not by a young man of uncertain lineage who lived in his kingdom by his sufferance. He began to scheme, his mind turning like a serpent coiling upon itself, seeking a way to remove this obstacle to his desires. One day, Polydectes announced a great banquet, declaring that he would take a wife, not Danae, he claimed, but another woman, Hippodamia, daughter of a distant king. He called upon all the noble young men of Seriphos to contribute gifts worthy of such a bride. Gifts of horses, as was the custom. It was a celebration, he said, and all were invited to show their honor and generosity. Perseus came to this banquet, though he owned no horses, having only his courage and his name. When his turn came to pledge his contribution, Polydectes smiled with false kindness and said, "And what will you bring, Perseus, son of Danae? A young man of such pride must surely have something worthy to offer." The gathered nobles laughed, and Perseus felt the shame of his poverty, the sting of being mocked before others. But more than shame, he felt the trap closing around him and his mother. In that moment, with the wine flowing and the torches casting dancing shadows on the walls, Perseus understood that Polydectes had never intended to marry another. This was merely a strategy to humiliate him, to diminish him in the eyes of the island's people. Pride rose in Perseus's chest, not the empty pride of vanity, but the fierce pride of one who refuses to be broken. In a voice that carried through the hall, clear and unwavering, he said, "I may not bring you horses, King Polydectes, but I will bring you a gift more rare and precious. I will bring you the head of Medusa, the Gorgon, whose gaze turns living flesh to stone." A hush fell over the banquet hall. Some gasped at the audacity of such a claim. Others looked upon Perseus with pity, for surely he had just promised his own death. The Gorgons were creatures of nightmare, ancient beings who dwelt at the edge of the world, in places where mortals dared not venture. Of the three sisters, Celaeno, Euryale, and Medusa, only Medusa was mortal, but all three possessed the terrible power to petrify any living thing that looked upon them. Many heroes had sought to destroy these monsters, and all had become nothing more than stone statues in their lair, eternal monuments to failed courage. Polydectes' smile widened, and there was no kindness in it now. "A bold promise indeed," he said softly. "Then I shall hold you to it, Perseus. Bring me the head of Medusa, and you shall have my respect and gratitude. Fail and trouble me no more." Perseus left the banquet hall with his head high, though his heart was heavy with the weight of what he had sworn. He had spoken rashly, driven by anger and the need to defend his mother's honor, but he was not a fool. He knew the magnitude of the task before him. How does one defeat an enemy one cannot look upon? How does one travel to the ends of the earth without guidance or provisions? That night, as Perseus walked alone upon the shore, where the waves whispered their ancient secrets to the sand, he felt the full burden of his promise. The stars above seemed impossibly distant, and the horizon stretched away into darkness. He thought of his mother, of the fear she must be feeling, of how his rash words might have made things worse rather than better. But Perseus was not entirely alone, even in his darkest hour, for his lineage, though he did not fully know it yet, was more remarkable than he could have imagined. His father was not a mortal man, but Zeus himself, king of the gods, who had come to Danae in a shower of golden light during her imprisonment. Divine blood ran in Perseus's veins, and the gods, in their mysterious ways, were watching. As he stood there in the darkness, a shimmer appeared in the air before him, like heat rising from sun-warmed stones. The shimmer took form, and Perseus found himself facing a tall woman whose presence commanded both awe and reverence. Her eyes were gray as storm clouds, bright with intelligence and purpose. She wore armor that seemed to glow with its own light, and she carried a great spear. Upon her shoulder perched an owl, watching Perseus with eyes that held ancient wisdom. "I am Athena," she said, and her voice was like wind through olive groves, powerful yet calming. "Goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, I have watched you, Perseus, and I have seen the courage in your heart, the love you bear for your mother. Your quest is worthy, but it cannot be accomplished by courage alone. You will need wisdom, and you will need help." Perseus fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the presence of the divine. "Great Athena," he said, his voice trembling with wonder and hope. "I spoke rashly, driven by anger and pride. But I cannot take back my words, and I would not if I could, for my mother's sake. I will attempt this quest, or die in the attempt. But I am only a mortal man. How can I hope to succeed where so many heroes have failed?" Athena smiled, and there was both sternness and kindness in that smile. "You are more than you know, Perseus, but you are right to recognize the difficulty of your task. Medusa was not always a monster, but that is a sorrow for another telling. What matters now is that she is dangerous beyond measure, and her gaze will turn you to stone as quickly as it has turned countless others. You must never look directly upon her, not even for an instant." She lifted her shield from where it rested upon her arm, and Perseus saw that it was made of polished bronze, bright as a mirror, its surface reflecting the starlight above. "Take this," Athena said, offering the shield to Perseus. "It is my own aegis, my shield of protection. When you face Medusa, you must use it as a mirror. Look only at her reflection, never at her true form. In this way, you may approach her without being turned to stone. The reflection holds none of the Gorgon's terrible power. It is merely an image, and images cannot harm you." Perseus took the shield with trembling hands, feeling its weight and balance. It was lighter than he had expected, yet strong beyond any mortal crafting. When he looked into its polished surface, he saw his own face reflected back at him, but also something more, a hint of determination, a glimmer of destiny. "I am grateful beyond words, great goddess," Perseus said. "But how shall I find the lair of the Gorgons? They dwell at the edge of the world, in places no map can chart." Before Athena could answer, another shimmer appeared in the air, and a second divine figure materialized beside her. This one was youthful and fleet of foot, with winged sandals upon his feet and a herald's staff in his hand. His eyes sparkled with quick intelligence and a hint of mischief. "That is where I come in," said Hermes, messenger of the gods, guide of travelers and souls. "I have walked every road and flown every path, from Olympus to the underworld, and back again. I know where the Gorgons dwell, though the way is perilous and strange. But you will need more than knowledge of the path. You will need the means to travel it." He gestured to his own feet, where the winged sandals fluttered gently, as if eager to take flight. "I will lend you these," Hermes said, removing the sandals and offering them to Perseus. "They will carry you swiftly across land and sea, and even through the air if need be. With these, distance becomes meaningless, and you may travel where mortals cannot normally go." Perseus accepted this second gift with profound gratitude, though he could hardly believe what was happening. The gods themselves had come to his aid, bringing gifts of divine craftsmanship. He removed his own worn sandals and put on those of Hermes, feeling them adjust to his feet, as if they had always been meant for him. Immediately, he felt a lightness, a sense that gravity itself had loosened its hold upon him. "There is more you will need," Hermes continued, producing a curved sword from thin air. The blade gleamed with an otherworldly sheen, sharp as starlight, unbreakable as destiny. "This is an adamantine sword, forged in the heart of Mount Olympus. It can cut through anything, even the scales and serpents of a Gorgon. No mortal weapon could harm Medusa, but this blade will serve you well." Perseus belted the sword at his side, feeling its perfect balance, the way it seemed to hum with potential energy. He looked from Athena to Hermes, these magnificent beings who had chosen to help him, and felt both humbled and emboldened. "Why?" he asked softly. "Why do you help me? I am no great hero, no proven warrior. I am merely a young man trying to protect his mother." Athena and Hermes exchanged a glance, and it was Athena who answered. "That is precisely why, Perseus. True heroism begins not with the desire for glory, but with love and duty. You do not seek to prove yourself. You seek to protect another. That is the seed from which the greatest heroes grow. Moreover, there are patterns at work here, threads being woven by the fates themselves. Your father was Zeus. Though you have lived as a mortal, you have a destiny to fulfill, though its full shape is not yet clear even to us." "My father?" Perseus breathed, the revelation striking him like a physical blow. He had always wondered about his parentage, had seen the sadness in his mother's eyes when he asked about his father as a child. Now suddenly, so much made sense. The oracle's prophecy that had caused his grandfather to cast them out, the divine protection that had carried them safely to Seriphos. "Yes," said Hermes gently, "but this changes nothing about who you are. You have been shaped by your mother's love and by the honest life you have led, not by divine heritage alone. The gifts we give you are tools, nothing more. How you use them, the choices you make, these come from your own heart and mind. There is one more thing you must know," Athena added, her expression growing more serious. "The journey to the Gorgon's lair is not straightforward. First, you must seek out the Grey Sisters, who are themselves ancient and strange. They are the sisters of the Gorgons, sharing a single eye and a single tooth among the three of them. They alone know the exact location of the Gorgons and the way to reach them. They will not give you this information willingly. You must be clever, Perseus, as well as brave." "How will I find these Grey Sisters?" Perseus asked. "Follow the setting sun westward, beyond the lands you know, to the place where day and night balance in perpetual twilight," Hermes instructed. "There, in a cave at the edge of the world, the Greya keep their eternal watch. But be warned, they are crafty and cruel. You must outsmart them to gain their knowledge." "There is more you will need," Athena said, and she produced a leather sack, supple and dark. "This is no ordinary bag. It is the kibisis, a magical pouch that will safely hold Medusa's head once you have taken it. Even severed, the head retains its petrifying power. You must never look directly at it, and this bag will contain its danger, keeping both you and others safe." Finally, Hermes gestured with his staff, and a cap appeared in his hands, dark as midnight, woven from material that seemed to shimmer and fade, even as Perseus looked at it. "This is the cap of invisibility, which belongs to Hades, lord of the underworld. He has consented to lend it to you for this quest. When you wear it, you cannot be seen by mortal or immortal eyes. It may prove invaluable, both in approaching the Gorgons and in escaping from them afterward." Perseus took each gift with reverence, understanding that he held items of immense power, tools that could mean the difference between success and a stone death. The shield, the sandals, the sword, the sack, and the cap. Each was a piece of the puzzle, a part of the solution to what had seemed an impossible task. "I do not know how to thank you," Perseus said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have given me hope where there was only despair. I will not fail in this quest. I will bring back Medusa's head, not for Polydectes' glory, but to free my mother from his tyranny." "Then go," Athena said, her voice both commanding and encouraging. "Remember, wisdom over recklessness, thought over impulse. Look with your mind as well as your eyes. Trust in your courage, but do not let it become foolhardiness. Many things in this world are not what they seem, and the line between monster and victim can be thinner than you might imagine." "The dawn is coming," Hermes added, glancing toward the eastern horizon where the first hints of light were beginning to paint the sky. "Return to your mother now. Say your farewells, for the journey ahead will be long and strange. When you are ready to depart, put on the winged sandals. Think of where you wish to go, and they will carry you there." With those words, the gods faded like morning dew beneath the sun, leaving Perseus alone on the beach with his divine gifts. He stood there for a long moment, letting the reality of what had just occurred settle into his mind. The gods had blessed him. He had a path forward. There was hope. As the sun rose, painting the waves with gold, Perseus made his way back to the small house he shared with his mother. He found Danae awake, worry etched into her features, for she had not slept since the terrible banquet the night before. When she saw him, she rushed to embrace him, tears streaming down her face. "My son," she whispered, "what have you done? That rash promise. Medusa will kill you. I cannot lose you. You are all I have." Perseus held his mother close, feeling her tremble in his arms, and his resolve hardened to steel. "Mother," he said gently, pulling back to look into her eyes, "I will not let Polydectes force you into marriage. I will not let him harm you. I know the quest I have sworn seems impossible, but I have been granted help. Divine help. Look." He showed her the gifts, the mirror-bright shield, the winged sandals, the gleaming sword, the magical sack, and the cap that seemed to vanish even as he held it. Danae's eyes widened with wonder and fear mingled together. "The gods themselves have blessed you," she breathed. "But Perseus, even with their help, the Gorgons are terrible beyond imagining. Many heroes, great warriors with years of training and experience, have tried to kill Medusa. All have failed. All have become stone." "I know," Perseus said softly, "but I am not those heroes, and they did not have what I have. Athena's wisdom to guide me, Hermes' gifts to aid me, and most importantly, a reason to succeed that burns brighter than any desire for glory. I do this for you, Mother, for the love you have shown me all my life, for the sacrifices you have made, for the strength you have given me. I will return to you. I promise. Danae cupped her son's face in her hands, looking at him as if memorizing every feature, storing up this moment against the long days of waiting ahead. "You have grown into a man of such courage," she said, her voice breaking. "I am so proud of you, my beloved son. If the gods have chosen to help you, then perhaps there is hope. But promise me this: be careful, be wise. Do not let pride or anger cloud your judgment. Think before you act, and remember that I need you to come back to me." "I promise," Perseus said again, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They spent that day together, speaking of memories and dreams, of love and hope. Danae prepared food for Perseus's journey, though they both knew that where he was going, ordinary provisions would matter little. She mended his cloak with careful stitches, each one a prayer for his safety. They walked along the beach where Perseus had so often played as a child, where Danae had taught him to swim and to understand the moods of the sea. As evening fell, Perseus knew he could delay no longer. The journey ahead was long, and every moment that passed was a moment Polydectes might press his suit upon Danae more forcefully. Perseus kissed his mother's forehead, held her one last time, and then, with the divine gifts secure upon his person, he stepped back. "Watch for me," he said. "I will return before the winter comes. Trust in that." Danae nodded, unable to speak, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. Perseus put on the winged sandals and thought of the place Athena and Hermes had described, the land beyond the lands he knew, where the Grey Sisters kept their vigil in perpetual twilight. He felt the sandals respond, felt himself lifted from the ground, as if he weighed no more than a bird. And then he was flying, rising up into the darkening sky, the island of Seriphos falling away beneath him. He looked back once and saw his mother standing on the beach, one hand raised in farewell, a small figure growing smaller still. Then he turned his face westward, toward the setting sun, toward the unknown, toward destiny. The flight was like nothing Perseus had ever experienced. The winged sandals carried him swift as thought, smooth as a dream. He soared over the dark sea, over islands he had never seen, over lands strange and distant. The wind rushed past him, cool and exhilarating, and despite the fear that lived in his heart, he felt also a wild joy, the joy of freedom, of movement, of possibility. Hours passed, or perhaps it was minutes. Time seemed to flow differently when one flew with divine sandals. The sun continued its descent, painting the sky in ever deeper shades of orange and purple, and still Perseus flew westward. The lands below became less familiar, more wild and strange. He saw mountains that touched the clouds, forests dark and deep, rivers that wound like silver ribbons through valleys he could not name. Finally, as the last light of day balanced against the first darkness of night, Perseus saw it. A land where twilight held permanent dominion, where the sun neither fully rose nor fully set, but hung in eternal golden blue suspension. It was beautiful and eerie, a place out of time, and Perseus felt a shiver run through him that was not entirely from the cooling air. He descended toward a rocky coastline, guided by instinct, and perhaps by the will of the gods who had blessed him. The winged sandals brought him to earth gently, and he found himself standing before the mouth of a cave. The cave was dark within, but from its depths came sounds, whispers, shufflings, the echo of voices both ancient and querulous. Perseus took a deep breath, steadying himself. He thought of his mother waiting for him, thought of Athena's words about wisdom and thought. Then, with one hand on the hilt of his divine sword, he entered the cave, leaving the twilight world behind him and stepping into the realm of the Grey Sisters, where his quest would truly begin. The darkness of the cave enveloped him like a cloak, and Perseus moved forward carefully, his eyes gradually adjusting to the dimness. The sounds grew louder, bickering voices, sharp and petulant, arguing over something with the persistence of those who have argued the same points for countless centuries. As he moved deeper, Perseus could make out a faint, eerie glow emanating from a chamber ahead. He crept closer, keeping to the shadows, and there, in a natural hollow lit by phosphorescent fungi, he saw them. The Grey Sisters, ancient beyond ancient, neither living nor dead, but suspended in some state between. There were 3 of them, hunched and withered, with long gray hair that fell like spider webs around their shoulders. They sat in a circle, and Perseus could see that they were passing something between them, the single eye they shared, taking turns to place it in the empty socket of their foreheads, each wanting to see, each jealous of the other's turn. Perseus watched them for a moment, understanding that here was his test. He would need to be clever, quick, and decisive. He waited, patient as a hunter, watching their pattern, understanding their rhythm. And when the moment was right, when the eye was passed from one sister to another, suspended in the air between their grasping hands, Perseus darted forward and snatched it away. The cry that rose from the 3 sisters was like nothing he had ever heard, a wail of rage and fear and loss. They groped blindly in the darkness, their ancient hands clutching at air, their voices rising in furious lament. Who steals from us? Who dares? Our eye, our precious eye, return it. We are blind, we are helpless. Give it back. Perseus stepped back, holding the eye carefully, feeling it pulse with strange life in his palm. It was warm and wet and thoroughly unsettling, but he forced himself to remain calm. I mean you no permanent harm, Grey Sisters, Perseus said, his voice steady and respectful. I need information that only you possess. Tell me where I can find the Gorgon's lair. Tell me the way to reach Medusa, and I will return your eye to you unharmed. Refuse, and I will cast it into the sea, leaving you in darkness forever. The sisters wailed and gnashed their shared tooth, but they were ancient and clever, and they knew they had no choice. Slowly, reluctantly, one of them spoke, her voice dry as dust. The Gorgons dwell far beyond this place, in a land where the sun never shines, at the very edge of night. You must fly further westward still, beyond the ocean, to the realm where Atlas holds up the sky. There, in a valley of black stone and twisted trees, you will find their lair. But be warned, mortal. Medusa may be the only mortal among them, but all 3 can turn you to stone with a glance. The path to their dwelling is littered with statues, heroes who thought themselves brave enough, strong enough, clever enough. None succeeded. You will not either. I will, Perseus said quietly, for I have what they did not, divine aid and a pure purpose. Tell me more. How shall I approach? How shall I know Medusa from her immortal sisters? Another sister spoke, her voice like wind through dead leaves. Medusa sleeps sometimes, for she alone is mortal and needs rest. Her sisters do not sleep. If you are fortunate, you may find her sleeping, alone, and vulnerable. But even in sleep, her power remains. Look upon her directly, and you will become stone before you can draw blade. The immortal sisters, Stheno and Euryale, are larger and more terrible, with bronze wings and golden scales. But Medusa was once beautiful, before she was cursed. She retains a terrible beauty even now, beneath the horror. That is what makes her most dangerous, the temptation to look, to see if the stories are true. The third sister added, "If you succeed, do not linger. Her sisters will know the moment she dies, and their rage will be beyond measure. They will pursue you to the ends of the earth if they can. You must flee immediately, faster than thought, and do not look back." Perseus nodded, absorbing this information, committing every detail to memory. "You have answered truthfully," he said. "I will keep my word." He approached the sisters carefully, and one by one, let each feel the eye, confirming that he still had it. Then he placed it in the waiting hand of the eldest, and the sisters snatched it eagerly, passing it among themselves, each desperate to see again, after even that brief blindness. Perseus backed away toward the cave entrance, but before he left, the eldest sister called out to him one more time. "Perseus, son of Zeus, you walk a knife's edge between hero and tragedy. Remember that Medusa was not always a monster. She was a maiden once, cursed for another's crime. There is injustice upon injustice in this tale. Do what you must, but do not forget that." These words troubled Perseus as he emerged from the cave back into the eternal twilight. He stood for a moment, thinking about what the Gray Sister had said. A maiden cursed for another's crime. What did that mean? But there was no time to puzzle it out now. His path was clear, his purpose unchanged. Whatever Medusa had once been, she was now a creature of deadly power, and she stood between him and his mother's freedom. Perseus put on the winged sandals once more, and launched himself into the sky, flying westward as the Gray had instructed. The journey seemed even longer than before, darker and stranger. He flew over seas that churned with strange lights beneath their surfaces, over islands where creatures neither fully human nor fully beast dwelt in mysterious communities. He saw the great Titan Atlas in the distance, straining under the weight of the heavens, and he gave that sight a wide berth, knowing that such ancient powers were beyond his understanding. Finally, after what felt like days of flight but might have been hours, for time ran strangely in these far places, Perseus saw it. A valley of black stone, twisted and desolate, where no light seemed to penetrate fully. Even from the air he could see them. Statues, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, scattered across the valley like a grotesque garden. Warriors frozen mid-strike, their stone faces locked in expressions of horror. Travelers caught in the act of fleeing, each one a testament to the Gorgon's terrible power. Perseus's heart hammered in his chest as he descended, but he forced himself to remain calm, to think clearly. He landed at the edge of the valley and took stock of his situation. This was the place. Somewhere in this nightmare landscape, the Gorgons made their lair. He retrieved the cap of invisibility from his pack and placed it upon his head, feeling it settle comfortably. Immediately, he looked down at himself and saw nothing. His body had vanished entirely. Even when he moved his hand before his face, he could see nothing, though he could feel its presence. Perfect, with the cap upon his head, the shield of Athena strapped to his arm, and the adamantine sword in his hand, Perseus began to make his way through the valley of stone. He walked among the statues, these frozen heroes, and felt a deep sorrow for them. Each had been someone's son, someone's love, someone's hope. Now they were nothing but monuments to failure and fear. He moved carefully, silently, using his invisibility to his advantage, but never forgetting that the Gorgons could still hear him if he made noise, could still sense disturbances in the air. He searched for hours, it seemed, until finally, as he rounded a large outcropping of black rock, he saw it, a cave mouth, wider and darker than any he had seen before. From within came sounds of breathing, deep and slow, the sound of something sleeping. But not all were sleeping. He could also hear movement, the rustle of scales, the slight scrape of claws on stone. The sisters, alert and watchful while Medusa rested. Perseus knew this was his moment. He crept closer to the cave entrance, every muscle tense, every sense alert. He could not afford a single mistake. One sound, one wrong step, and he would alert the immortal sisters. He positioned Athena's shield before him, angling it so that he could see the cave's interior, reflected in its polished surface, without looking directly. The reflection was dim, but clear enough. He saw them, two massive forms, the immortal Gorgons, Stheno and Euryale, pacing like great cats that are their bronze wings folded against their backs, their bodies covered in golden scales that gleamed even in the darkness. They were terrifying beyond description, and Perseus felt his courage waver for just a moment. But then he saw her, Medusa. She lay sleeping on a bed of stone, separated from her sisters by a natural partition in the cave. Her serpent hair writhed slowly, even in sleep, a mass of living vipers that hissed and coiled around her head. Her face, even in the reflection, was both beautiful and terrible. High cheekbones, full lips, but eyes that, even closed, seemed to hold ancient sorrow and rage. The Grey Sister's words echoed in Perseus's mind. She was a maiden once, cursed for another's crime. But there was no time for contemplation, no room for mercy that might endanger his mother. Perseus tightened his grip on the adamantine sword and began to creep into the cave, invisible, silent as a shadow, his eyes fixed on the reflection in the shield, never once looking directly at what lay before him. The immortal sisters continued their patrol, unaware of his presence. Perseus moved with painful slowness, each step calculated, each breath controlled. He made his way toward Medusa's sleeping form, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain everyone must hear it. He reached her at last, standing over her sleeping form, seeing her only in reflection. This was the moment. This was what all his journey had led to. He raised the adamantine sword, and in one swift, sure motion, guided by the reflection in Athena's shield, he struck. The blade, sharp beyond mortal understanding, cut through Medusa's neck cleanly, and in that instant, Perseus knew he had succeeded. But he also knew he had only moments before everything changed, before the immortal sisters realized what had happened, before the Valley of Stone erupted in fury and pursuit. He had taken the first head. Now he had to survive the consequences. The moment the adamantine sword severed Medusa's neck, time itself seemed to pause, holding its breath for one perfect, terrible instant. Perseus, still watching only through the polished surface of Athena's shield, saw the reflection of what he had done. The clean cut, the head separated from the body, the serpents in Medusa's hair writhing in their death throes. Even in the mirror's image, he could sense the power radiating from that severed head, a force ancient and undeniable. His hands moved with desperate speed, guided by training he didn't remember receiving, but that seemed to flow through him nonetheless. Perhaps a gift from Athena, perhaps simply the clarity that comes when survival depends on split-second decisions. He grabbed the head by its serpent hair, feeling the cold, dry scales against his palms, the vipers snapping at his hands, but unable to penetrate the divine protection that surrounded him. Never once did he look directly at what he held. The magical sack, the kibisis that Athena had given him, seemed to open of its own accord, eager to contain this dangerous treasure. Perseus thrust Medusa's head into the bag and pulled the drawstring tight, feeling the enchantment take hold, sealing away the Gorgon's deadly gaze. The weight of it was strange, both lighter and heavier than it should be, as if the bag contained not just physical matter, but concentrated destiny itself. But even as Perseus secured the bag, the cave erupted in sound. The two immortal sisters, Stheno and Euryale, released a shriek that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. It was a sound of rage beyond measure, of grief transmuted instantly into murderous fury. They had felt the moment of their sister's death, had sensed the severance of the thread that bound the three of them across eons of existence. Perseus didn't hesitate. Even invisible, he knew they could track him by sound, by the disturbance he made in the air, by senses beyond mortal understanding. He launched himself toward the cave entrance, his winged sandals responding to his desperate need for speed. Behind him, he heard the rush of bronze wings unfolding, the scrape of golden claws on stone, and voices that were no longer remotely human, pure rage given form and sound. He burst from the cave mouth into the dim valley, and even through his invisibility, he could sense the immortal Gorgons pursuing him. They might not be able to see him, but they could feel him, could track the disruption his flight made in the still air of their domain. Their shrieks echoed off the black stone, waking all the dark things that dwelt in that cursed place. The winged sandals carried Perseus upward, faster than any mortal could run, faster than eagles fly. But the immortal Gorgons had wings too, and they had flown these skies since time immemorial. They knew every current, every pathway through the air. They were gaining on him. Perseus clutched the kibises closer to his chest and poured every ounce of his will into flying faster, higher, away from this place of death and stone. He soared over the valley of statues, each frozen hero a reminder of what failure meant, and then beyond, out over strange seas and stranger lands. The pursuit seemed to last forever. The Gorgon sisters were relentless, their fury driving them beyond any normal limits. Perseus could hear them behind him, could feel the displacement of air from their massive wings. Once, he glanced back, using Athena's shield as a mirror, careful never to look directly, and saw them, two dark shapes against the twilight sky, terrible in their vengeance, beautiful in their terrible way, like avenging spirits from the dawn of time. But gradually, slowly, the divine sandals proved their worth. Perseus began to pull away from his pursuers. The distance between them lengthened, 10 lengths, 20, 100. The shrieks of rage grew fainter, more distant, until finally they faded altogether into the wind. Perseus flew on for what felt like hours more, not daring to stop, not daring to believe he had truly escaped. Only when the landscape below changed from those strange, dark lands to something more familiar, seas he recognized, islands he knew, did Perseus finally allow himself to slow, to descend, to feel the rush of relief and triumph course through his weary body. He had done it. Against all odds, against all the heroes who had tried and failed before him, he had taken Medusa's head and lived. He landed on a rocky outcrop overlooking the sea, his legs trembling from exertion and the aftermath of fear. He removed the cap of invisibility and tucked it safely away, then carefully set down the kibises, checking to ensure its seal remained strong. The bag pulsed slightly, as if the head within retained some measure of life, some echo of the power it had held. Perseus sat down on the rocks, his breath coming in great gasps, his mind slowly catching up with everything that had happened. The deed was done. Medusa was dead, her head secured. But as the immediate danger faded and his heart rate began to slow, other thoughts crept in, troubling thoughts that he had kept at bay during the desperate action of the quest. He remembered the Grey Sister's words. She was a maiden once, cursed for another's crime. He thought of Medusa's face as he had seen it in the reflection, beautiful even in its horror, with an expression that even in sleep had held something like sorrow. What had she been before the curse? What crime had earned such a terrible transformation? And whose crime had it truly been? Perseus knew the stories, or some of them. He had heard whispers of Medusa's tale during his youth, though the details were murky. Medusa had been a priestess of Athena, a maiden renowned for her beauty, particularly her magnificent hair. She had been pursued by Poseidon, god of the seas, and when his attentions became too insistent, too forceful, when he had claimed her against her will in Athena's own temple, it was Medusa who had been punished. Athena, enraged by the violation of her sacred space, had transformed Medusa from a beautiful maiden into a monster whose very gaze brought death. Her lovely hair had become a nest of serpents, her face a thing of horror. She had been exiled to the edge of the world, forced to live in isolation and fear, knowing that anyone who looked upon her would die, turned to stone by a curse that was both her power and her prison. It was a story of profound injustice. A woman punished for being the victim of a god's desire, transformed into a monster, not for her own crimes, but for the violation done to her. Perseus felt a deep unease settle over him as he considered this. He had killed Medusa, had taken her head as a trophy to win his mother's freedom. But in doing so, had he simply perpetuated a cycle of injustice? Had he become another instrument of cruelty in a tale that had already contained far too much? He sat there on those rocks as the sun began its journey across the sky, wrestling with these thoughts. The world of gods and heroes was more complex than the simple stories suggested. Heroes and monsters, victims and villains, these categories were not as clear as he had once believed. Medusa had been dangerous, yes, deadly, beyond question. The Valley of Stone statues proved that. But she had also been tragic, a victim transformed into a threat, punished endlessly for something that had been done to her, rather than something she had done. Perseus thought of his mother, of the injustice she faced from Polydectes, and saw uncomfortable parallels. Both women had been pursued by powerful men who refused to accept rejection. Both had suffered for the desires of others. The difference was that Perseus had been able to protect Danae. But who had protected Medusa? Who had stood up for her when she needed help? These were heavy thoughts, weighted with moral complexity that Perseus had not anticipated when he began this quest. But he understood, sitting there with the sea breeze cool on his face, that this was part of becoming a true hero. Not just completing impossible tasks, but grappling with the consequences, understanding that every action ripples outward in ways we cannot always predict or control. "I am sorry," he whispered to the kibisis, to the head it contained, to the woman who had once been. "I am sorry that your fate was this. I am sorry that I had to be the instrument of your end. But I will not let your death be meaningless. I will use this power to protect, not to harm, to free, not to oppress. That is the only redemption I can offer." The bag did not respond, of course, but Perseus felt something shift within him. A commitment, a vow to himself and to the memory of who Medusa had been before tragedy claimed her. As he sat there contemplating, Perseus became aware that he was not alone. The air shimmered, and there stood Hermes, the messenger god, his expression gentle and knowing. "You have succeeded where many have failed," Hermes said, settling down on the rocks beside Perseus. "You should feel proud. I feel complicated," Perseus admitted. "Is that strange? I accomplished what I set out to do. I have the head. I can save my mother. But I cannot stop thinking about Medusa's story, about the injustice of it all." Hermes nodded slowly, his quick eyes thoughtful. "That is not strange at all, Perseus. In fact, it is the mark of wisdom. Many heroes complete their quests and never stop to consider the cost, the larger implications of their actions. They see only the glory, the achievement, the songs that will be sung about them. But you see deeper. You recognize that even necessary actions can be born from unjust circumstances." "Did Athena know?" Perseus asked quietly. "When she cursed Medusa, did she know it was wrong? That Medusa was innocent?" Hermes was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight of ancient sorrow. "The gods are powerful, Perseus, but we are not perfect. We feel rage and jealousy, pride and possessiveness. Athena felt her temple had been violated, her sacred space profaned, and she acted in fury. Whether she considered Medusa's innocence in that moment, I do not know. The gods often act in ways mortals find difficult to understand, operating on scales of time and purpose that extend beyond individual lives. But yes, injustice was done to Medusa. That cannot be denied." "Then why did Athena help me kill her?" Perseus asked, struggling to understand. "Why would she give me the tools to finish what she started with the curse?" "Because," Hermes said gently, "Medusa had become dangerous, regardless of how she came to be that way. Every person who looked upon her died. She could not help it, could not control it, but the danger was real. Sometimes there are no good choices, Perseus, only necessary ones. Athena helped you not out of cruelty to Medusa, but out of recognition that the situation could not continue indefinitely. And perhaps there was some element of mercy in it, too. Medusa's life was no life at all. Isolated, feared, able to form no connections, no relationships, nothing but loneliness and the steady accumulation of stone corpses. Death for her, might have been a release. Perseus considered this, trying to find peace with it. "I hope that's true," he said finally. "I hope that wherever she is now, she has found some freedom from the curse, some rest." "Your compassion does you credit," Hermes said, standing and preparing to depart. "But do not let it paralyze you. You still have much to do. Your journey is not finished. You must return to Seriphos, to your mother. But perhaps there are other adventures waiting for you along the way. The world is wide, and you carry with you a great power. Use it wisely." With those words, Hermes vanished, leaving Perseus alone once more with his thoughts and his burden. Perseus stood, shouldered his pack with the kibises safely secured, and prepared to continue his journey. But as he put on the winged sandals and launched himself into the sky, his path took an unexpected turn. For there, visible in the distance, Perseus saw something that made him change course immediately. On a rocky promontory jutting out into the sea, a figure was chained. A woman, her arms raised and bound to the stone, her body exposed to the elements and the dangers of the coast. Even from this distance, Perseus could see that she was in distress, and his heart, already tender from his reflections on justice and innocence, could not ignore such a sight. He flew closer, descending toward the promontory, and as he approached, he could see her more clearly. She was young, perhaps near his own age, with dark skin and darker hair that whipped in the sea wind. She was dressed in simple white cloth, now torn and stained, and her wrists were raw from the chains that bound her. But what caught Perseus's attention most was her face, not because of beauty, though she was beautiful, but because of the expression she wore. Resignation mixed with fear, the look of someone who has accepted a terrible fate, but cannot help being afraid of it. Perseus landed on the rocks near her, and she started at his sudden appearance, her eyes widening in surprise and a flicker of hope. "Please," she called out, her voice hoarse from crying or calling for help. "Please, if you have any kindness in you, either free me or kill me quickly. Don't leave me here for the monster." "Monster?" Perseus asked, approaching her cautiously. "What monster? Who has done this to you?" "My name is Andromeda," the woman said, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. I was princess of this land, daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia. My mother boasted that I was more beautiful than the Nereids, the sea nymphs, and for that boast, the god Poseidon sent a terrible sea monster to ravage our coast. The oracle said the only way to appease his wrath was to sacrifice me to the creature. So my parents, to save their kingdom, chained me here as an offering. The monster comes at high tide, and high tide is nearly here." Perseus felt anger surge through him, hot and righteous. Another innocent punished for another's crime. This time, a mother's prideful boasting. Another woman made to suffer for circumstances beyond her control. The pattern was clear, and Perseus found he could not, would not, allow it to continue. "I will not let that happen," he said firmly, drawing his sword. "I am Perseus, and I have just slain the Gorgon Medusa. One more monster is not beyond me." Andromeda's eyes widened further. "Perseus, the son of Zeus, the stories of your quest have traveled even here, though we thought them merely tales. You truly killed Medusa?" "I did," Perseus confirmed, "and I will not let you be sacrificed. Which direction does this sea monster come from?" Andromeda pointed toward the open ocean, And even as she did, Perseus saw it, a disturbance in the water, growing larger as something massive approached beneath the waves. The sea began to churn and foam, and then the creature emerged. It was vast, serpentine, with scales that gleamed like dark jade, and eyes that reflected no mercy, only hunger. Its mouth gaped wide enough to swallow a ship, lined with rows of teeth, like swords. It was ancient power given flesh, a creature of the deep places where light never reaches. And it had come to claim its prize. Perseus positioned himself between Andromeda and the approaching monster, his mind racing. The creature was too large to fight conventionally. Even his divine sword would be like a needle against such bulk. But he had other weapons, other gifts. As the monster surged toward the rocks, its massive head rising from the waves, Perseus reached into the kibisis. His fingers closed around cold flesh and writhing serpents, and he pulled out Medusa's head, careful to keep his own eyes averted, using only his peripheral vision and instinct to aim. "Look away," he shouted to Andromeda. "Close your eyes and turn your head." Andromeda obeyed instantly, pressing her face against the stone to which she was chained. Perseus held up Medusa's head, pointing it directly at the oncoming monster. The sea creature's eyes locked onto the Gorgon's face, and the effect was instantaneous. The monster's charge halted mid-surge. Its massive body went rigid, its scales hardening, its flesh transmuting from living tissue to solid stone. The transformation spread from its head backward, flowing through its enormous body like frost spreading across water, until the entire creature was nothing but a massive statue, frozen in its moment of attack. The weight of all that stone was too much. The monster, now a sculpture of its former self, toppled sideways and crashed into the sea with a tremendous splash, sending waves washing over the promontory. Slowly, inevitably, it began to sink, disappearing beneath the surface, descending to become just another strange formation on the ocean floor. Its threat ended forever. Perseus quickly returned Medusa's head to the kibisis, sealing it away once more. He turned to Andromeda, who was cautiously opening her eyes, hardly daring to believe what had happened. "It's safe," Perseus said gently. "The monster is gone. Let me free you from these chains." He examined the chains that bound her, heavy iron that would normally require a smith's tools to break. But the adamantine sword cut through them as easily as through spider silk. The chains fell away, and Andromeda collapsed, her legs too weak to support her after hours of standing bound to the rock. Perseus caught her, supporting her weight, and helped her sit down on the rocks. She was trembling, whether from cold, from shock, from relief. He could not tell, probably from all three. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you. I thought I was going to die. I thought there was no hope." "There is always hope," Perseus said, though he wondered if he truly believed that, after everything he had learned, everything he had done. "Can you walk? We should get you away from here, back to your family." "My family," Andromeda said, and there was bitterness in her voice now, mixing with the relief. "My family who chained me here. My mother whose pride caused this. My father who was too weak to refuse the sacrifice." Perseus understood her anger, her complex feelings toward those who should have protected her, but had instead offered her up to save themselves. "Even so," he said gently, "you are safe now, and you should return. What you do after that, Whether you forgive them, whether you stay with them, that is your choice to make. But first, let's get you warm and safe." Andromeda nodded, accepting his help to stand. She was unsteady at first, but gradually her strength returned. They made their way along the promontory back toward the shore, and as they walked, Andromeda kept glancing at Perseus with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "Why did you help me?" she asked at last. "You could have flown past. You have your own quest, your own purpose. Why stop for a stranger?" Perseus thought about how to answer. He thought about Medusa, about his mother, about all the injustices he had witnessed and participated in. "Because I have learned recently that the world has too much suffering in it already. Too many people punished for things they did not do. If I have the power to stop even one such injustice, how can I not use it? What good is being a hero if I only seek glory for myself?" Andromeda smiled then, the first real smile Perseus had seen from her, and it transformed her face, lighting it from within with warmth and joy. "Then you are a true hero," she said softly. "Not because you killed Medusa, but because you saved me. Not for songs or fame, but simply because it was right." By the time they reached the shore, a crowd had gathered. Word had spread of the monster's defeat. King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia came rushing down to meet them, the queen weeping with joy and relief, the king's face a mixture of gratitude and shame. "My daughter," Cassiopeia cried, embracing Andromeda. "You're alive. The monster. Someone killed it. Who?" She turned and saw Perseus, saw the divine sword at his side, the winged sandals on his feet, and understanding dawned. You saved her." "I did," Perseus said simply. King Cepheus stepped forward, his bearing regal but his eyes humble. "Perseus, son of Zeus, hero who slew Medusa, you have saved not only my daughter, but our entire kingdom. The monster would have continued to ravage our coasts. We owe you a debt beyond measure. Name your reward, and if it is within my power, it shall be yours." Perseus was about to refuse any reward. He had not helped Andromeda for payment, but then he looked at her, saw her watching him with those dark, intelligent eyes, and something shifted in his heart. They had shared something on that promontory, he realized. A moment of genuine connection, of understanding. She had seen him not as a hero of legend, but as a person who chose to help. And he had seen in her a strength that suffering had not broken, only tested and refined. "There is one thing," Perseus said slowly, surprising himself. "I would ask permission to court your daughter, if she is willing. Not now. I must return home, must complete my quest and secure my mother's safety. But after, if Andromeda would allow it, I would like to return and see if what I felt today might grow into something deeper." Andromeda blushed, but met his gaze steadily. "I would like that," she said, "very much." King Cepheus looked relieved. This was a request easily granted and would bind the hero to their family. "You have our blessing, of course. Return when your quest is complete, and you will be welcomed as family." Perseus spent one more day with Andromeda and her family, recovering his strength and learning about her kingdom. They walked together along the beach, talking about everything and nothing, their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. Perseus told her about his mother, about Polydectes, about the quest that had brought him so far from home. Andromeda told him about her childhood, about her complex feelings toward her parents, about her desire to live a life of purpose rather than simply being an ornament in the palace. When it came time to leave, they embraced, and Perseus made a promise. I will return when everything is settled, when my mother is safe and Polydectes is dealt with. I will come back for you. I'll be waiting, Andromeda said, and Perseus believed her. He took to the air once more, the winged sandals carrying him homeward at last. The kibyssus hung heavy at his side, its precious and terrible contents secured. His heart felt lighter than it had in weeks, despite the weight of what he carried. He had saved Andromeda. He had prevented one tragedy, even if he could not undo others. That had to count for something. The journey back to Seriphos passed in a blur of sea and sky. Perseus flew with purpose now, eager to see his mother, to free her from Polydectes' threats, to bring his quest to its conclusion. Days passed beneath him, or perhaps hours. Time seemed fluid when one traveled by divine means. Finally, he saw it. The familiar outline of Seriphos, the island that had been his home for most of his life. He descended toward the shore, toward the small house he shared with his mother, his heart full of anticipation. But when he arrived, the house was empty. Danae was not there. A terrible fear gripped Perseus's heart. What had happened in his absence? Had Polydectes grown impatient? Had he forced his mother into marriage, or worse? Perseus rushed to find Dictys, the kind fisherman who had first saved them so many years ago. He found him on the beach, mending nets, and the old man's face lit up with joy and relief when he saw Perseus. Perseus, thank the gods you've returned. We feared you were dead. Where is my mother? Perseus demanded, trying to control the panic in his voice. What has happened? Dictys' face darkened. Polydectes grew tired of waiting. He declared that you had certainly perished in your quest, and that there was no longer any impediment to his marriage to Danae. She refused him still, and so he threatened her, Perseus. Threatened to harm her, to imprison her, to make her life misery until she consented. She fled to the temple, seeking sanctuary. She has been living there under Athena's protection, but Polydectes has surrounded the temple. He is preparing to violate the sanctuary, to take her by force. He plans to do so tomorrow, at noon. White-hot rage flowed through Perseus, hotter than anything he had felt even in the moment of taking Medusa's head. Polydectes had pushed too far, had revealed himself completely. No more games, no more pretense of honor. The king had shown his true nature, a tyrant, a predator, a man who would violate every law of gods and men to possess what he wanted. Then tomorrow at noon, Perseus said, his voice deadly calm, Polydectes will receive the gift he requested. I will bring him the head of Medusa, just as I promised. Dictys looked at Perseus with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Be careful, my boy. Polydectes will have guards, will have the support of many of the nobles who benefit from his rule. I know, Perseus said, but I have something they don't. I have justice on my side, and I have a weapon they cannot defend against. That night, Perseus did not sleep. He sat on the beach where the gods had first appeared to him, where his quest had truly begun. And he thought about everything that had happened, everything he had learned. Tomorrow would bring an ending, one way or another. Tomorrow he would face Polydectes and free his mother from fear. He thought about Medusa, about Andromeda, about his mother, about all the women who had suffered, because powerful men believed they could take what they wanted without consequence. Tomorrow Perseus would deliver a message. There are consequences. There is justice. Not every wrong can be righted, but some can be. And it was time for Polydectes to learn that lesson. As the sun rose on what would be the last day of Polydectes' reign, Perseus prepared himself. He checked the kibisis one final time, ensuring the seal was strong. He strapped Athena's shield to his arm, belted the adamantine sword at his waist, and adjusted the winged sandals on his feet. He was ready. At noon, he walked into the palace where Polydectes held court, surrounded by his nobles and guards. The great hall fell silent as Perseus entered, for he had been presumed dead, and his appearance was like seeing a ghost. Polydectes, seated on his throne, went pale, then flushed with anger. "Perseus," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury, "you return. Did you bring my gift, or have you come to admit your failure and beg forgiveness?" "I brought your gift," Perseus said calmly. "The head of Medusa, exactly as I promised." "Impossible," one of the nobles scoffed. "Many have tried to kill the Gorgon. All have failed. You're lying." "Am I?" Perseus asked. "Shall I show you?" "Yes," Polydectes said, leaning forward on his throne, his eyes gleaming with malicious anticipation. He didn't believe Perseus had succeeded, thought this was some desperate bluff. "Show us this head. Prove that you completed your impossible quest." Perseus looked around the hall, at all these men who had supported Polydectes, who had known what he planned to do to Danae, and had not spoken against it. He felt no pity for them, no remorse for what was about to happen. They had made their choices. "As you wish," Perseus said, "but I warn you, those who have been loyal to me, who have been kind to me and my mother, should close their eyes now. Dictys, if you're here, look away." He saw Dictys at the edge of the crowd, and the old fisherman, understanding, quickly covered his eyes and turned his face to the wall. Then Perseus reached into the kibisis and drew out Medusa's head, holding it high for all to see. He kept his own eyes carefully averted, watching only through the reflective surface of Athena's shield, but the nobles and guards and Polydectes himself. They looked directly at what Perseus held. Their eyes widened in shock, in recognition of what they were seeing, and then, one by one, they froze. The transformation was swift and complete. Flesh hardened to stone, color drained away to gray, movement ceased entirely. In the space of heartbeats, the entire court, Polydectes on his throne, his guards with their hands on their sword hilts, his nobles in their fine clothes, all became statues, frozen forever in their final moments of life. The great hall was silent now, silent as a tomb, filled with stone figures that would never move again, never speak again, never threaten or harm anyone again. Perseus carefully returned Medusa's head to the kibisis and sealed it once more. He looked around at what he had done, at the stone court, and felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a weary sense of completion. This had needed to be done. Polydectes had given him no choice. "It's over," he said quietly, and Dictys uncovered his eyes and came to stand beside him, looking at the stone figures with a mixture of horror and relief. "What happens now?" Dictys asked. "Now I find my mother," Perseus said, "and then we figure out what comes next." He left the palace and went to the temple, where Danae had taken sanctuary. She was there, praying before Athena's altar, and when she heard his footsteps, she turned. For a moment, she just stared at him, hardly daring to believe he was real. Then she ran to him, and they embraced, both of them weeping with relief and joy, and the release of long-held fear. "My son," Danae whispered, "my brave, wonderful son. You came back. You're alive." "I promised I would," Perseus said, holding her tight, "and Polydectes will never threaten you again. He's gone, mother. You're free." They stood there together in the temple, in the presence of the goddess who had blessed Perseus's quest, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, they felt safe, truly safe. The people of Seriphos, freed from Polydectes' tyranny, came together to decide their future. They asked Dictys, the kind fisherman who had saved Danae and Perseus so many years ago, to be their king, and he accepted with humble grace. Under his rule, the island would be governed with wisdom and compassion, not fear and greed. Perseus and Danae could have stayed there, could have lived out their lives in peace on Seriphos. But Perseus had promises to keep and a larger destiny calling to him. He had told Andromeda he would return, and he meant to keep that promise. And there was another matter, too. His grandfather, Acrisius, who had cast him and his mother out so long ago. The oracle's prophecy that had started all this had not yet been fulfilled, and Perseus knew somehow that his story was not yet complete. But for now, on this day, it was enough to hold his mother and know that she was safe, that Polydectes was gone, that the quest was complete. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new journeys, but today they had peace, and that was enough. The days following Polydectes' fall were strange and dreamlike for Perseus. After so much tension, so much danger and desperate purpose, the sudden absence of immediate threat left him feeling unmoored, like a ship that has lost sight of its guiding star. He and his mother remained on Seriphos for a time, helping Dictys establish his new rule and ensuring that the island's transition from tyranny to just governance proceeded smoothly. During those quiet days, Perseus found himself often walking along the shore, the kibises always with him, for he dared not leave Medusa's head unattended, dared not risk it falling into the wrong hands. The weight of it had become familiar, a constant reminder of what he carried, what he had done, what power he possessed. Danae watched her son with worried eyes during this time. She saw how he had changed, how the boy who had left on an impossible quest had returned as a man bearing not just divine gifts, but the burden of difficult knowledge. He was quieter now, more contemplative, his eyes holding shadows they had not held before. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sea in shades of gold and rose, Danae finally spoke of what she had been thinking. "You're planning to leave again," she said softly. It was not a question. Perseus nodded slowly. "I made a promise to someone, a woman named Andromeda, whom I saved from a sea monster. I told her I would return when my quest was complete, and my mother was safe. I mean to keep that promise." Danae smiled, though there was sadness in it. "Tell me about her." And so Perseus did. He spoke of finding Andromeda chained to the rocks, of her courage in the face of death, of how she had seen him not as a hero of legend, but simply as a person who chose to do right. He spoke of their brief time together, of the connection he had felt, of how she had inspired in him a desire to be better, to use his power not for glory, but for protection. She sounds remarkable, Danae said when he finished, and I can hear in your voice that she matters to you. You should go to her, Perseus. Keep your promise. Find out if what you felt might grow into something lasting. But what about you? Perseus asked, concern filling his voice. I cannot leave you unprotected again. Danae laughed gently and took her son's hand. My dear boy, I am safer now than I have been in years. Dictys is a good man and a just king. Polydectes is gone, and his court with him. And more than that, I am not the helpless woman you seem to think I am. I have survived much in my life. A father's betrayal, the sea's fury, years of poverty and uncertainty, and a king's unwanted attentions. I am strong, Perseus. I do not need you to be my shield forever. It is time for you to live your own life, to find your own happiness. Perseus felt tears sting his eyes. You have given me so much, Mother. Your love, your strength, your wisdom, everything I am, I owe to you. And that is why I can let you go, Danae said, her own eyes glistening, because I raised you to be a man who keeps his promises, who protects the innocent, who sees the humanity in others. Go to this Andromeda. Build a life with her, if that is what you both desire. My joy is in knowing that you are happy and fulfilled, not in keeping you close out of fear. They embraced, and in that embrace was the love of years, the bond that had sustained them through every trial. But there was also, Perseus realized, a releasing. His mother letting him go into the world, trusting that the foundation she had given him would be enough. The next morning, Perseus prepared to depart. Dictys came to see him off, clasping his shoulder with affection. You've done a great thing here, Perseus, the old fisherman said, not just killing Medusa or defeating Polydectes, but in showing the people of this island what true courage looks like. Not the absence of fear, but acting rightly despite it. You will always have a home here, should you need one. Perseus thanked him, embraced his mother one last time, and then took to the sky once more. The winged sandals carried him eastward, back toward the kingdom of Cepheus and Cassiopeia, back toward Andromeda. His heart felt lighter than it had in weeks, buoyed by hope and anticipation. The flight took several days, with Perseus stopping occasionally to rest on remote islands or mountain peaks. During these quiet moments, he found himself thinking about his future, about what life might hold beyond quests and monsters. He had been defined for so long by what he had to do. Protect his mother, complete the quest, defeat Polydectes. Now for the first time, he could think about what he wanted to do, who he wanted to be. When he finally arrived at Cepheus's kingdom, he was greeted with celebration. Word of his defeat of Polydectes had somehow traveled ahead of him, perhaps carried by traders, perhaps by the mysterious ways that stories always seem to spread. The people hailed him as a hero, but Perseus found the adulation uncomfortable. He had not done these things for glory, and the praise felt hollow when he remembered Medusa's story, the complexity of what he carried in the kibisis. Andromeda met him at the palace gates, and when their eyes met, Perseus knew he had made the right choice in returning. She had not idealized him in his absence, had not built him up into something more than human in her mind. Her smile was warm and real, welcoming him as a person, not as a legend. You came back, she said, and there was joy in her voice, but also something deeper. Relief, perhaps, that he had proven himself to be a man of his word. I made a promise. Perseus said simply, "I always intended to keep it." They walked together in the palace gardens, talking as they had before, but with a new ease born of mutual respect and growing affection. Perseus told her of his mother's safety, of Dictys's kingship, of his mixed feelings about what he had done to Polydectes's court. "Do you regret it?" Andromeda asked, using Medusa's head that way. Perseus considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Polydectes left me no other choice, that his tyranny had to end that way. But do I regret protecting my mother? No, never. The weight of it is not in the act itself, but in recognizing that even just actions can be born from unjust circumstances. Medusa should never have been cursed. Polydectes should never have been a tyrant. But given that those things were true, I did what I had to do." Andromeda nodded, understanding. "That is the burden of power, I think. Not just having it, but understanding what it costs to use it, even in service of good." Their courtship unfolded gently over the following weeks. Perseus stayed in the palace as an honored guest, and he and Andromeda spent their days together, walking, talking, learning each other's stories and dreams. They found in each other a rare compatibility, a matching of minds and hearts that felt like coming home. King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia watched this growing love with mixed emotions. They were grateful to Perseus for saving their daughter and their kingdom, but they also felt the weight of their own guilt. They had been willing to sacrifice Andromeda to save themselves. Perseus's presence was a constant reminder of their failure as parents, even as it was also a reminder of their redemption through his intervention. One evening, Perseus asked for a private audience with the king and queen. When they were alone in the throne room, he spoke plainly. "I love your daughter," he said, "and I believe she loves me. I wish to marry her, with your blessing and with hers. But before you answer, I need you to understand something. I will not take her from here simply to make her a wife in my household. Andromeda is brilliant, strong, and capable. Whatever life we build together will be one where she is my equal partner, where her voice matters as much as mine. I have seen too many women diminished by the men in their lives. I will not be another such man." Cepheus and Cassiopeia exchanged glances, and it was Cassiopeia who spoke first. "We have wronged our daughter," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "My pride nearly cost her life. Her father's weakness nearly allowed it. We would be honored if she found happiness with you, Perseus. You have shown more care for her well-being than we did in her darkest hour. If Andromeda wishes to marry you, you have our blessing. But you should know," Cepheus added, "that Andromeda was betrothed before all this occurred. To Phineus, her uncle, my brother. He fled when the sea monster came, abandoned her to her fate, rather than try to help. We consider that betrothal broken by his cowardice, but he may not agree. He may cause trouble. Then we will face that trouble together," Perseus said. "But Andromeda's choice is what matters most. It is her life, her future. She should decide it." When Perseus proposed to Andromeda later that day, kneeling before her in the garden where they had spent so many hours together, she said yes without hesitation. They were married in a ceremony that was both joyous and solemn, binding their lives together with vows spoken before gods and mortals alike. The wedding feast was a grand affair. with food and wine in abundance, music and dancing filling the palace halls. Perseus felt happier than he had ever been, seeing Andromeda radiant in her wedding garments, knowing that they would face the future together. But happiness, as Perseus had learned, can be fragile. Partway through the feast, the doors to the great hall burst open, and Phineus stormed in, followed by a group of armed men. His face was twisted with rage and wounded pride. "This marriage is unlawful," he shouted, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent hall. "Andromeda was promised to me. I have a prior claim." Perseus stood slowly, his hand moving to the hilt of his sword. "You abandoned her," he said, his voice cold. "When she was chained to the rocks, when the monster came for her, where were you? You fled. You have no claim on her." "I was gathering forces," Phineus snarled, though everyone in the hall knew this for the lie it was. "I was planning a rescue. You interfered, stole my glory and my bride. I demand satisfaction. Give her up, or I will take her by force." Andromeda stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "I was never yours, Phineus. Even when my parents promised me to you, my heart was never yours. You showed your true nature when you abandoned me. Perseus saved me. Perseus values me. Perseus loves me. I choose him freely and completely. You have no power here." Phineus's face darkened with fury. "Then if I cannot have you, neither shall he." He gestured to his men. "Kill them both." The armed men surged forward, and chaos erupted in the hall. Guests scattered, tables overturned, the celebration transforming instantly into violence. Perseus drew his sword, positioning himself between the attackers and Andromeda. He fought skillfully, the divine blade making short work of mortal weapons. But there were many attackers, and he could not be everywhere at once. King Cepheus's guards fought alongside Perseus, defending their new prince and princess. But the clash was fierce. Blood stained the floor of the great hall, and the sounds of combat echoed off the stone walls. Perseus fought with desperate intensity, knowing that he could not fail, could not let harm come to Andromeda on their wedding day. But the attackers kept coming, wave after wave of men loyal to Phineus, men who saw a chance for reward, or who feared their master's wrath more than they feared Perseus's sword. Perseus felt himself being driven back, felt exhaustion beginning to creep into his limbs. Andromeda, watching the battle unfold, saw her new husband being overwhelmed and made a decision. She ran to where Perseus had left the kibisis, the magical sack that contained Medusa's head. She had never touched it before, had been too frightened of what it contained. But fear for Perseus's life outweighed all other concerns. "Perseus," she called out, and he turned to see her holding the kibisis. "End this." Perseus understood immediately. He fought his way to Andromeda's side, took the kibisis from her, and held it high above his head. "Everyone who does not wish to become stone, close your eyes now," he commanded. "Turn away. This is your only warning." The loyal guests and guards immediately complied, covering their eyes, turning to face the walls. But Phineus and his men, caught up in their bloodlust, either did not hear or did not believe. They continued their advance, weapons raised, fury in their eyes. Perseus reached into the kibisis and drew forth Medusa's head for the second time. He held it before him, careful as always not to look directly at it himself, watching only through Athena's shield. The effect was the same as it had been with Polydectes' court. Phineus and his followers looked upon the Gorgon's face, and froze instantly, their bodies transforming from flesh to stone. Phineus himself was caught mid-stride, his arm raised to strike, his face locked in an expression of rage and disbelief. Around him, his men became statues, a garden of stone warriors frozen in their final moments of attack. The great hall fell silent once more, the only sounds the heavy breathing of those who survived, and the quiet weeping of those who mourned fallen friends. Perseus carefully returned Medusa's head to the kibisis and looked around at what the celebration had become. A hall now filled with stone figures, blood on the floor, the joy of the day shattered. He felt a profound weariness settle over him. This was the third time he had used Medusa's head, the third time he had turned living beings to stone. Each time had been necessary, each time had been in defense of himself or those he loved. But the weight of it accumulated, the knowledge that he held the power to end lives with just a glance, to transform people into permanent monuments of their final moments. Andromeda came to his side, taking his hand, and her touch brought him back from the dark place his thoughts had been going. "You saved us," she said softly. "Again, you protected us all." "I know," Perseus said, "but I'm tired, Andromeda. Tired of using this power. Tired of death, even when it's justified. I want to build things, not destroy them. I want to live a life of peace with you, not constantly fighting battles." "Then we will," Andromeda promised. "After this, we will find a place to build our life together. Away from courts and politics, away from those who would use your power for their own ends. Just us, making our own way." It was a beautiful dream, and Perseus wanted desperately to believe it was possible. But even as he stood there holding his new wife's hand, surrounded by the stone remnants of Phineus's attack, he felt the weight of destiny pressing upon him. His story was not yet complete. There was still one piece of his past that remained unresolved. His grandfather, Acrisius, the oracle's prophecy that had started everything. The prophecy had said that the son of Danae would kill Acrisius. That was why Perseus and his mother had been cast out, set adrift upon the sea to die. That was the fear that had driven Acrisius to such cruelty toward his own daughter. The prophecy had not yet come true. Perseus had not sought out his grandfather, had no desire for vengeance or even for acknowledgement. But prophecies, Perseus had learned, have a way of fulfilling themselves regardless of anyone's desires. In the days following the attack, as the hall was cleaned and order restored, Perseus wrestled with what to do. He could stay here with Andromeda, build a life in her father's kingdom, and perhaps never cross paths with Acrisius. Or he could seek out his grandfather, not to fulfill the prophecy, but to understand it, to confront the man whose fear had shaped so much of Perseus's life. Andromeda, sensing his troubled thoughts, asked him one evening what weighed upon his mind. Perseus told her everything, about Acrisius, about the prophecy, about the fear of becoming an instrument of fate despite his own will. "Then go to him," Andromeda said, "not to fulfill any prophecy, but to free yourself from its shadow. Speak with him, understand him. Let him see that you are a man, not a weapon of destiny. Perhaps in doing so, you rob the prophecy of its power." It was wise counsel, and Perseus felt his heart lighten at hearing it. "Will you come with me?" he asked. "Of course," Andromeda said. "We are married now." Your journey is my journey. Your family, even the difficult parts, are mine to understand as well. And so, a few weeks after their wedding, Perseus and Andromeda set out for Argos, the kingdom of Acrisius. Perseus wore the winged sandals and carried Andromeda in his arms as they flew, and she laughed with delight at the sensation, her fear of heights forgotten in the wonder of soaring through clouds and sky. They arrived in Argos to find the kingdom in a strange state. Acrisius, they learned, was no longer there. The old king had heard rumors of Perseus's deeds, of how the son of Danae had survived and become a great hero. Terrified that the prophecy would soon be fulfilled, Acrisius had fled his own kingdom, leaving it in the care of regents while he traveled to distant Larissa, where he hoped to hide from fate itself. Perseus felt a mixture of relief and frustration. He had come seeking confrontation or reconciliation, and instead found only his grandfather's absence, the old man's fear still running his life as it had run Perseus's mother's life so many years before. "What do you want to do?" Andromeda asked. Perseus thought for a long moment. "I want to show the people of Argos that I have no designs on the throne, that I am not the threat my grandfather fears. And then I think we should let it be. If Acrisius wants to spend his remaining years hiding from a prophecy, that is his choice. I will not chase him. I will not give the prophecy any more power than it already has." They stayed in Argos for a time, and Perseus proved himself to be honorable and just, speaking with the regents and the pupil, assuring them that he sought no crown, no vengeance, only understanding. The people, who had heard tales of his heroism, welcomed him warmly, and many expressed regret for their king's actions toward Danae all those years ago. During their stay, word came of great funeral games being held in Larissa to honor a deceased king. It was a grand event, drawing nobles and athletes from across the region, and Perseus was invited to attend as a gesture of honor and goodwill. Perseus decided to accept the invitation. Perhaps, he thought, this would be an opportunity to demonstrate his skills in peaceful competition rather than in battle. He was weary of fighting, weary of death. The chance to test himself against other athletes in games of skill and strength appealed to him. Andromeda accompanied him to Larissa, and they watched the initial contests together: foot races and wrestling, chariot racing, and javelin throws. The atmosphere was festive, celebratory, a gathering of people honoring the dead through displays of living excellence. When it came time for the discus throw, Perseus decided to participate. He had practiced the sport in his youth on Seriphos, and he possessed natural strength enhanced by his divine heritage. He approached the throwing circle, feeling the weight of the discus in his hand, judging the wind and distance. In the stands, unbeknownst to Perseus, sat an old man wrapped in a traveling cloak, his face hidden. It was Acrisius, who had thought himself safe in distant Larissa, who had come to watch the games, never expecting to encounter his grandson. Perseus wound up and released the discus with all his strength. It flew straight and true, sailing farther than any throw before it. The crowd cheered at the magnificent display of athleticism, but then, caught by an unexpected gust of wind, the discus curved in its flight, veering off course, sailing up into the stands. The old man in the traveling cloak looked up, saw the bronze disc hurtling toward him, but he was too old, too slow to move in time. The discus struck him squarely in the temple, and Acrisius, king of Argos, fell dead instantly, killed by his own grandson's hand in a freak accident of wind and fate. The crowd's cheers turned to gasps and cries of alarm. Perseus rushed to where the discus had struck, pushing through the crowd, and when he saw the dead man's face revealed, when he recognized the features that were so like his mother's, he understood what had happened. The prophecy had fulfilled itself after all, not through malice or intent, not through seeking or vengeance, but through pure accident, through the intersection of choices and chance that the fates had woven long ago. Perseus had killed his grandfather, just as the oracle had foretold. Perseus fell to his knees beside Acrisius's body, overwhelmed by grief and horror. He had not wanted this. He had never wanted this. He had tried to avoid it, to defy fate, to prove that free will could overcome prophecy. But in the end, the prophecy had come true, precisely because he had tried to avoid it. If he had never left Seriphos, had never become a hero, had never been invited to these games, this never would have happened. Andromeda knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her presence a comfort even in this darkest moment. "It was an accident," she said softly. "You are not to blame for this." "Am I not?" Perseus asked, his voice breaking. "If I had stayed away from Argos, if I had not come to these games, he would still be alive. The prophecy said I would kill him, and I did. The prophecy also drove him to cast out your mother and you when you were an infant," Andromeda said gently. "It drove him to attempt murder through abandonment. It drove him to flee his own kingdom, to live in fear. The prophecy destroyed his life long before today. What happened here was a tragedy, Perseus, but it was not murder. It was fate working itself out in ways no mortal can control or predict. The authorities of Larissa, once they understood what had happened, declared it a tragic accident. There would be no charges, no punishment, but Perseus bore a heavier punishment than any court could impose. The knowledge that he had become what he never wanted to be, the instrument of his grandfather's death. He arranged for Acrisius to be buried with full honors, paying for the funeral from his own resources. He stood at the grave and spoke words of regret and sorrow, acknowledging the cycle of fear and tragedy that had consumed his family across generations. "I forgive you, grandfather," Perseus said to the grave, "for casting us out, for your attempt to murder us. I forgive you because I understand now that you were as much a prisoner of this prophecy as I have been. I wish we could have met as family, rather than as fulfillment of fate. I wish fear had not ruled both our lives. May you find peace now that the prophecy is complete, and its power is ended." After the funeral, Perseus and Andromeda left Larissa. They had no desire to remain in that place of sorrow, no wish to linger where tragedy had struck. They traveled slowly, in no particular hurry, letting the journey itself be a kind of healing. "Where shall we go?" Andromeda asked one evening, as they camped beneath the stars. Perseus thought about it. "I don't want the throne of Argos," he said. "That kingdom is tainted by too much pain, and I don't want to return to Seriphos. Though I love my mother and Dictys, I think we need to find our own place, somewhere we can build something new, not haunted by the past." "I would like that," Andromeda said. "A fresh start, A place where you're not the hero who killed Medusa, where I'm not the princess who was nearly sacrificed. Just Perseus and Andromeda, building a life together. They found that place eventually, a small kingdom called Tyrans, where they were welcomed and where Perseus's reputation opened doors but did not overwhelm their daily existence. There, they built their life. They had children, sons and daughters who grew up hearing their parents' stories, but who were free to write their own tales. They built a palace not of grandeur but of warmth, a home filled with love and laughter rather than fear and ambition. Perseus kept the divine gifts for a time, but eventually he felt the need to return them. Athena's shield, Hermes' sandals and sword, the cap of invisibility, these were too powerful, too tempting, too dangerous to keep. He traveled one last time to the places of the gods and returned each gift to its proper owner, thanking them for their help, but releasing himself from the burden of such power. Only Medusa's head remained, and Perseus knew he could never simply discard it or destroy it. The power it contained was too great, too dangerous. After much thought and consultation with wise advisors, Perseus journeyed one final time to Athens, to the great temple of Athena, and there he gave the Gorgon's head to the goddess who had first helped him obtain it. Athena accepted this gift and placed it upon her aegis, her shield, where it would remain forever after, a decoration and a protection, a reminder of Perseus's quest and of Medusa's tragic story. In this way, Medusa's power would be controlled and contained, used only in service of wisdom and just protection, never again as a weapon of indiscriminate death. With this final act, Perseus felt a great weight lift from his shoulders. He had completed his journey in every sense. The physical quest, the moral reckoning, and the release of the power that had defined him. He returned to Tyrans and to Andromeda, ready at last to live simply as a man, a husband, a father. The years passed gently after that. Perseus and Andromeda grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They watched their children grow and have children of their own. Perseus became known not as a mighty hero or slayer of monsters, but as a just ruler, a wise counselor, a man who valued compassion and understanding above glory and conquest. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the work of the day was done, and he and Andromeda sat together, watching the sunset, Perseus would think back on his journey. He would remember the terrified young man who had rashly promised to bring back Medusa's head. He would remember the Grey Sisters and their cave of eternal twilight. He would remember the moment of striking, guided by reflection, never looking directly at what he faced. He would remember Medusa herself, and he would whisper a prayer for her, for the maiden she had been before the curse, for the monster she had been forced to become, for the tragedy of her existence. He had come to understand that there were no simple stories, no pure heroes or absolute monsters. There was only the complex web of choices and circumstances, of justice and injustice intertwined, of people doing the best they could with the circumstances fate had given them. Andromeda, sensing his thoughts, would take his hand, and they would sit in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other through tragedy and built something beautiful from the ruins of broken prophecies and shattered fears. Perseus never forgot the lessons of his journey. He taught his children that true courage is not the absence of fear, but acting rightly despite it. He taught them that power must be tempered with compassion, that strength means nothing without wisdom. He taught them to see the humanity in others, even in those who seem monstrous, and to understand that every story has depths that are not immediately visible. And when Perseus finally died, old and content, surrounded by family and love, the stories said that Athena herself came to bear his soul to the heavens, where he was placed among the stars as a constellation, Perseus the hero, eternally holding the reflection of Medusa's head, forever frozen in the moment of his greatest triumph and his greatest burden. But for those who truly understood his story, that constellation meant something more. It was a reminder that heroism is complex, that justice is nuanced, that every act of courage exists within a web of consequences, both intended and unforeseen. It was a reminder that we are all both the authors of our own stories and the characters in tales written by forces larger than ourselves. And on clear nights, when people looked up at that constellation, some would think of Perseus, the mighty hero, but others, wiser perhaps, would think of Medusa the maiden, of Danae the survivor, of Andromeda the strong, of all the people whose lives had been shaped by prophecy and transformed by courage. The story of Perseus and Medusa was not a simple tale of hero and monster. It was a story about cycles of injustice and redemption, about the weight of power and the importance of wisdom, about love and duty and the complex terrain between them. It was a story about how we choose to act when faced with impossible circumstances, and how even when we cannot change the past or avoid fate entirely, we can still choose to act with compassion, with thought, with care for those around us. And that perhaps is the truest heroism of all, not the slaying of monsters or the completion of impossible quests, but the daily choice to be kind, to be just, to be thoughtful in our use of power. Perseus had learned this lesson through great trial and sorrow, but he had learned it well, and he had passed it on to those who came after. The stars shone on, eternal and unchanging, while below them generations of mortals lived and loved and struggled with their own versions of Perseus's dilemmas. And the story, like all the best stories, continued to teach and inspire, not because it offered simple answers, but because it asked difficult questions and invited each listener to grapple with them in their own way. In the end, Perseus had found peace, not through the erasure of what he had done or the avoidance of consequences, but through acceptance, through understanding, and through the choice to build something good from the complex legacy of his actions. He had learned that we cannot always control what we must do, but we can control how we do it, and what we do afterward. And that quiet wisdom, more than all his heroic deeds, was what made Perseus truly great. Not a hero without flaw or doubt, but a person who faced difficult choices, who made mistakes, who carried burdens, and who still managed to build a life of meaning and love. The story ends as all stories must, with death and transformation, with memory and legacy, with questions left for each new generation to answer in their own way. But for Perseus and Andromeda, for Danae and Dictys, for all those whose lives were touched by this tale, the ending was also a beginning, the chance to rest, to be at peace, to know that despite everything, despite prophecy and curse and the cruelty of fate, they had found moments of joy, had created islands of love in a sea of suffering, had proven that even in the darkest stories, light can be found if we are brave enough and wise enough to seek it. And so the tale of Perseus and Medusa comes to its close. A bedtime story not of simple triumph, but of complex truth. Not of glory alone, but of growth and understanding. May those who hear it sleep well, dream deeply, and wake with the courage to face their own journeys with wisdom, compassion, and hope.